This is the MFG Monkey Podcast. We sit down with leaders and innovators in the industry to talk about manufacturing, business, and the stories behind their successes. I'm your host, Dustin McMillan, owner and founder of McMillan Co. Ryan, welcome. Thank you for joining us on MFG Monkey today.
Absolutely. Glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you and I've known each other for a few years. I forget how long it's been or how long ago we met, but it's been a number of years, hasn't
It has. It makes me feel old thinking about it, but I think
it?
it's been probably about 10
Has
years
it really?
or so.
Oh, I wouldn't have guessed.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah,
Okay.
probably 2013, 14
Okay.
time frame.
That makes
Yeah.
sense. So yeah, geez. Okay. All right. Let's move on from that because I feel old now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I follow you on LinkedIn and you had posted a couple cool things and I thought, man, this is be a really good subject for us to talk about on the podcast and reconnect. And I think the last time we saw each other was at Panera. I don't know how long ago. But we've always had good conversation together, so this should be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I've only grown a few gray hairs since the last time
Yeah.
we spoke, but I can tell stories about each one of them probably.
Yeah, no, as you can see, I'm graying up quite a bit myself. I don't I haven't shaved clean for probably 20 years, and I just kind of trim up. And I was looking in the mirror today and I'm like, man, that thing's looking gray. Let's cut a majority of that off.
Exactly. I'm the same way. I started clean shaving again just because my whole beard's white now and it makes me look 10 years older.
Right.
So
Right.
gotta stay young at heart.
Absolutely. Yeah, I still feel young. That's a good thing, right?
Yeah,
So I guess that's what matters. Looks will change a little bit.
absolutely.
But yeah, so tell us about what you're doing now and I guess a little summary over the last 10 years that we haven't connected.
Yeah, well, I'll give a little bit of context for your viewers' sake. I started off my career. I did almost a decade in business and commercial banking at JP Morgan Chase. And late in my career there, I started really meeting a lot of entrepreneurs that just inspired me. And I knew that I wanted to support them and actually be one in ways that I couldn't do through the bank. And so I started angel investing and uh, getting into these companies and working with these entrepreneurs that way. And so when we first met, I had actually transitioned from being an angel investor to being an actual former venture capitalist. I had started a firm with some people I knew and dove into that head first and realized pretty quickly that I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. I wasn't quite as resilient as I thought I was, coming from an environment at the bank where I never failed at anything.
Right.
And so I was in this period when we first met of, I'm investing in entrepreneurs. I am an entrepreneur. It was a time of learning, and I call that time my $1 million MBA.
Right.
And it was a period where invested in a lot of companies, and I saw a lot of ups and downs, and really became a student of human beings at
Mhm.
that point. You can invest in a company, or you can start a company and you can build a company, and you can look at it in a particular context of what their LinkedIn says and what your LinkedIn says and what your resume says. And oftentimes the success of an organization comes down to the people that are behind it, not just who they are on paper, but who
Mhm.
they actually are inside. And
Yeah.
so I was going through that journey and started an accelerator, started consulting kind of after I left that initial venture capital firm, and I was consulting for a little bit, mostly in the small and medium enterprise space, and got pulled back into venture back in 2017 with some people that I really admired
Hmm.
and were friends with that were doing some pretty cool things. And so I've been there ever since, and have been investing again in companies. In total, I've invested in and funded probably over 120 companies at this
Oh wow.
point throughout my career, and so a lot of learning experiences,
Sure.
which ultimately culminated in
Right.
that LinkedIn post
Yeah. Yeah.
that you read a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. No, that's great, and I think that that's how you and I met. Is there's a one of many companies that I've started. I pitched the idea to you guys. Isn't is that
I
correct?
think so. I
Yeah.
think so.
That company failed when it went away. It was a solely philanthropic company that, I thought because we had that philanthropic backbone that people would, just jump all over it, and it was in the oil and gas industry, and I thought it was a great idea. And I had got my $1 million MBA, uh, doing that company. So learned a lot, spent a lot
Yep.
of money, but those things are fun. All those failures have led me personally to to where I'm at, and with Macmillan Co. And we we've reinvented ourselves at least twice now in the last 10 years, which is really cool. And you have to be just unbelievably resilient, and if you get rattled too easy, you quit. And I think that that's why, what is the you probably know this statistic better than I do, but 1% of all companies survive more than 5 years, and then 1% of those actually do $1 million of revenue or more. Is that a good
That's
statistic?
pretty close. You're
Yeah.
not far off if you
Okay.
are. Yeah,
Sure.
it's really slim,
Yeah.
margin of error
Yeah.
for companies to squeeze through
Yeah.
and win. And
Yeah.
it's kind of that space that we play in.
Yeah.
Whether you're an entrepreneur, a business owner, someone that's investing in it, that's what you're really trying to find.
Yeah. And then it is. I mean, it can be heartbreaking. You can have the best day of your life, and then later that day you can have the worst day of your life, and you have to wake up the next day and just go back at it, or you're gonna
Yeah,
go work somewhere. And I that's my personally that's my drug. That's what gets me out of bed
right.
every day and gets my juices going. And some of my folks that work for me now are like, "What in the hell are we doing?" And I'm like, "It'll work out. It'll work out." Just and that really plays into your posts as well. It's just having your team on board, and that culture, and being
Yeah.
having a very transparent goal, and a clear path, even though it's not always extremely clear because it could change at any given moment. But I think is if your team knows where you're going or where you want to go, and they trust you, and everyone feels appreciated, then you can do anything you want.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It is so critical, and you can't undervalue that.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's a compounding effect over time as well.
Yeah.
That a little bit here and there starts to compound, and if you're doing things right and you're investing in that culture and you're building and you're listening
Yep.
as a leader or a business owner, then you're going to compound those gains of performance and
Yep.
outcomes. If you don't, it starts to compound the other way,
Yes.
and you just start seeing, if you consider your business a ship, you start seeing these holes just starting to rust through your hull of your company, and you don't know where they're coming from, but that
Yeah.
compounding effect goes both ways.
Yeah. And I love that analogy. When you and I caught up a week or so ago, you used that analogy, and I thought it was a great one. Walk everyone through. You told the whole story about that analogy when we were on the phone the other day, and I thought it was awesome.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I've gone on a couple of cruises in the last year, and so it just when you're on a vacation and you're trying to get your mind off of things, you tend to notice things that you probably wouldn't notice otherwise. And I'd never been on a cruise before, and ironically just decided to go on two in a year. And what I noticed was is that there are probably 1,000 plus crew members on this ship, and they all have to be coordinated and work in the same direction.
Right.
But what I tend to notice with businesses is that you can have a team of any size, and the team tends to end up focusing on the engine room.
Right.
And the captain of the ship is like, hey, we've got to keep this engine going. It has to go as fast as possible. Let's improve this engine so we can go faster, 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 do more, more, more. And you can have that engine room in perfect condition. And at the end of the day, if everyone is focused on fueling that engine and making it work really well, at the end of the day, those crew members aren't around the ship noticing things that are starting to happen. A paint chip here or there that every morning I'd be walking out, on the deck, and I would notice that there were crew members always painting something. You
Mm-hmm.
know, they notice something and they start patching that. So visually it looks good, but functionally, if there is a rust spot on the ship, if you don't address that, eventually that starts developing from a cosmetic,
Mm-hmm.
blemish into
Sure.
a hole in your ship.
Right.
And if everyone's focused on driving that ship forward and no one's focusing on the little things that keep the deck clean, make sure water isn't building up, somewhere, what's the issue here, what's the issue there, eventually your engine's going to be running full bore and your ship is going to start sinking.
Mm-hmm.
And the captain's going to be like, what the heck is happening? Why is my ship sinking?
Right.
My engines are going full bore. But it is so relevant and true in our businesses
Yep.
and how we treat it.
Yeah.
And we have to have a culture that focuses on the little things, because those little things tend to create pain points, not only for our customers, but for our team members themselves. And if they don't feel the empowerment and the ability to address the little things that are slowing them down, that are driving them crazy, that are driving their colleagues crazy,
Yeah.
those are the compounding effects that start to add up and create those holes in your ship.
Yeah. No, I can't agree more. And probably the biggest thing that I took out of that is just the employees and the appreciation. Um, I I truly believe if you could have the worst idea in the world, and if your employees feel appreciated and they don't
Yep.
feel like you're just, they don't feel like they're a number, and they're just there to, do what you want them to do. um, you can make the shittiest idea work, I think. Um, and if not, everyone's going to be happy doing it at least. And a- and and
Yeah.
it helps you shift very quickly, and people don't get discouraged. I my operations manager's on vacation. She has emailed me every damn day. Ashley, stop emailing me. enjoy enjoy vacation. But I mean, that makes me feel really good. Also, she gets up in the morning, she puts in a couple hours of work on vacation, and then she goes and watches her son play baseball. Or, they're going to
Yeah.
Disney and all those things. And
Yeah.
even like there's nothing that I could say that's going to stop her from, being engaged, even though, she's in Florida for a week or two. I couldn't even tell you. But yeah.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
those are the things that again, when someone feels engaged, not only in your mission, there's
mhm,
a lot of there's a lot of content, there's a lot of books and people out there that coach on developing that kind of mentality, but that is just a piece of it. And oftentimes we kind of let it go there, and we don't reinforce that, how do you truly get someone to feel ownership of the
Right.
company, even if whether they have actual ownership or equity in the company,
Yep.
you know, that type of behavior when it's not forced. There are a lot of companies that really force their people,
Mhm.
unfortunately, to do those type of things while they're on vacation.
Yeah.
That is one thing, but when someone feels so engaged and
Yeah.
bought in to a company, to a culture, to a mission,
Yeah.
that they're checking in because they want to, because
Yeah.
it gives them peace of mind.
Yeah.
As a business owner, that's what gives me peace of mind when I'm on
Heck yeah.
vacation.
Yeah.
There are days where I completely want to unplug and I don't want to think about anything, but
Right.
there are days and I wake up and I'm like, man, I'm really excited to see how this thing is going. So I
Yeah.
will plug in because I want to, and because
Right.
it will help me relax and have a better day knowing that. And if you can, as a leader, get your team, not again, not force them to do that, and not expect them to do that in any
Yep.
way, but when they want to do that and you have to force them not to do it,
Right.
that's a really good problem to have.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can't be more fortunate with everyone on my team. I mean, there's people that we've had to, you okay, you haven't taken any time off. Take some Friday. Don't come in. Just
Yeah,
take the day off.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's. I mean, it is. And you know, those things are just invaluable. I mean, money can't substitute that. And there's a saying that I actually learned yesterday in my Vistage meeting was what was it? Hire five, pay them like eight, work them like 10. And I'm like, that's one way to go about it. And I think it was like Carnegie that said that, and I'm like, "What an asshole thing to say," right? Like, I mean, if
yeah,
that's your mentality, I mean, yeah, you're doing, great by, paying them over market, but if you just
yeah,
work them to the bone, and there's plenty of companies out
yeah,
there that are doing that. Probably Amazon is an example of one of those giant companies that just works people like hell, and
yeah,
they have a lot of people. I don't know what their turnover is, but, um, I don't know. They're doing
yeah.
something right
I
though.
Yeah. I don't know either, but it's certainly one of those things where that mentality, you don't exactly you know revel in the authority of those titans of industry
Right.
back in those days. I think Henry Ford might have been the exception of that as far
Yeah.
as how they treated their workers. But yeah, especially today when there's so much choice.
Sure.
There's a shortage in the workforce. Finding and retaining great people
Yes.
is super hard. You cannot have a mentality of that saying, or
No.
you're gonna sink
Yeah, you're gonna
really
have a
quick.
revolving door. I mean, and
Yeah,
and I've worked at those companies, and looking back on it, it was for me to have that experience. It sucked at the time, but now I look back on it and I'm like, man, I know what not to do now. And I was at a particular company, and they wanted everyone to feel empowered.
yeah,
The leader, the two owners, and the president would say, "You're empowered to do this." But when it came time to make a decision, and no matter for the management team, no matter what the dollar amount was, it could have been a $5 purchase or running to Staples to pick up a new keyboard. They wanted to approve it. Like, you had to submit a purchase rec to buy anything. And it's like,
yeah,
okay, if you don't trust me that my keyboard doesn't work and I want to go buy a new keyboard, like, where are we at here? And
yeah,
and I
yeah,
saw it on such a big level where, guys that were general managers of other factories would come to work and be a manager, an operations manager or whatever, and they had to ask permission to buy everything, any any oil, any
yeah,
maintenance. I mean, it was you would just watch these guys like walk with their head, down to the president's office and say, "Hey, can I buy some cutting oil for this machine because we need it?" And you'd sign off on it and hand it back to him. I'm like, how demoralizing is that? And
yeah,
with my team, it's like, you know, if it's not going to sink the ship, buy the damn thing. If you know we need it, and I trust you to only buy what we need to get the job done, just buy it. You don't have to call me or ask me permission. And, you know, and I almost, and they feel guilty about buying stuff. I see it come across in the Amex,
Yeah.
and I'll still get a call. Hey, I just spent $2,000 on this. I'm like, okay. They're like, you don't have any
Yep.
questions? I'm like, no. Should I?
Yep.
And
Yep.
finally it got to the point where, they just don't, I don't hear about it. I see it come through. I may every once in a while go, "Hey, what was that for?" That was kind of expensive. And they're like, "Oh yeah, the motor went out on our air compressor." I'm like, "Oh, okay, that thing was expensive." And, we move on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really one of those things. I've noticed that a lot. The last couple of years, we at my venture firm, we decided after observing a lot of companies that in our portfolio we had invested in,
Mhm.
and we saw some companies that were just going through the roof. Their growth was just exponential, and everything was going right, and that led to them raising more money and getting
Mhm.
more funding, and in really big chunks. And so they would close on these deals, they would get this capital, they would mostly invest that capital into people.
Mhm.
And you
Yep.
saw these companies that were going from 10 to 15 people up to 80 to 100 people in the course of a
Oh,
year.
wow. Wow.
And that's significant growth, and their revenue was growing, everything was growing and going well.
Mhm.
They had great products. The product was well received by their customers. It was driving growth. They hired great people, but what was happening was they oftentimes failed to set up a culture of trust and empowerment,
Okay.
because simply they they hadn't needed to do that before. They had smaller teams,
Mhm.
they had a good dynamic that led to that success, and it wasn't an intentional thing. That for the most part, I'm sure there's always exceptions to the rule, but you know we really try not to invest in a-holes as a rule of thumb. So
Right.
they weren't treating their employees badly. They weren't, they were hiring mostly entrepreneurial minded people, in the sense
Mhm.
that, hey, you're coming into a really earlier stage high growth company.
Mhm.
You have to have a particular mindset,
Yep.
where you see a problem and you fix it. You
Yeah.
see a problem, you're empowered to fix it.
Yep.
But when you hit that high growth, you're hiring at such a high rate. You've got all these people coming in at once, and all of a sudden you have a completely different culture, um, by design almost.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know how to handle that. And
Yeah.
you hire great leaders even that have thrived in other environments, but maybe they haven't built that culture themselves. And
Yeah.
so you just see this culmination of little things. And it could be something where, hey, we're under a strict budget, and if we don't intend to tell you that we don't trust you, that's not what we mean, that's not what we intend. But hey, we're operating on razor thin budgets right now,
Mhm.
as
Yep.
we're growing this. We're trying to get to profitability to a certain extent, and so it's not that we don't trust you, but we need to approve these type of things.
Yeah.
And what that tells the employee, even though that's not the intent, is that we don't trust you.
Right.
And you're asked, it's a mixed messages. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, we want you to come in here and solve problems, and you know and then we don't trust you to make a $20 purchase.
Yeah.
And those mixed messages, in my experience, has collectively seen a big pullback. And you
Yeah.
just see these teams of highly capable, talented people pulling back,
Mhm.
and you just see these we see these companies hitting a ceiling. And
Mhm.
so it's like, boom, you hit that ceiling, and you just start falling back down to earth. And it's because these employees just became disengaged.
Yeah.
And you know in almost all of the cases, again, it wasn't that the owners of the company or their leadership teams were treating them poorly. It was that these all these factors just led them to say, you know what, I'm going to focus on my job. My job is this, and a client comes in and asks for X. I fulfill X, and I move on to the next one.
Right.
And I see all of these things popping up, but I haven't had a good experience in trying to do these type of things. And this person over here annoys me because they send this thing to me and it causes this issue, and the widget falls off, and so I don't want to work with them, and I'm just going to focus and do my job.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, I'm going to get out of here as quickly as I can
Right.
because I don't like this.
Right.
And when you've got a good chunk of your team hitting that mentality,
Yep.
you're in trouble.
Oh,
You're in big trouble.
absolutely. Yeah, I can't agree more. And even with new folks coming on, I think that because of past experiences and because of their head trash, it takes them a while to really engage at a high level. Because
Yeah.
I what I have witnessed is just because we trust our folks and uh, that we bring on to make those decisions and make those $20 purchases and things like
Yep.
that. It takes them a little bit to go, okay, this is real. Like this isn't a trick. And then once they get to that point, you can almost see like their energy comes up and they're just more relaxed and they really mesh into the culture of the company. But it takes a little bit of learning curve for them really to get it and really to understand that, okay, you're a valued member of the team, you make the decision, we trust what you do, you're going to make a mistake, right? And
Yep.
I think that that's a really important thing for leaders to do is go, hey, we're going to make mistakes. You're
Yep.
operating at a very high level. There's no way that you're going to be perfect 100% of the time. Just don't make that
Yep.
same mistake again. Learn from it
Yes.
and move on. And but
Yes.
hey, when you make the mistake, let's brush off and move on. I mean,
Yeah.
if I dwelled on every mistake that I made, I sure the hell wouldn't be sitting here. Um, and I've
Yeah.
made some really big mistakes, and even in the
Me
last
too.
year, I've made some mistakes, and my team looks at me, and I'm like, hey, I screwed up. Let's let's move on. Let's forget it. Let's fix that, and then let's
Yeah.
move on and not make. Don't let me make that mistake again. And you know, and
Yeah.
it is interesting to see just the people really engaged at that point.
Yeah, yeah, and it's those type of things that when your team sees you do that and sees you convey that and bounce back,
Yeah.
and it gives them the signal that they can do the same.
Yeah, and
And
we've yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, and we've had people make, we had an engineer one time make a mistake that cost us $20,000, and $20,000 to us is, I mean, it might as well be $1,000,000. And he comes in my office and he's like almost in tears, and it was over. We had a big project for Red Robin restaurants. We helped them design the product. We had everything made. We brought it in, repackaged it, we kitted it for them, and we distributed it to 700 restaurants in like 9 weeks. It was during COVID, and we absolutely crushed it. We had one hiccup, and it was because we didn't use a box that UPS approved. The box was way overrated for everything, and but we didn't read what the UPS standard was for this, whatever they wanted.
sure, sure.
And we had pictures of tires laying on top of our boxes and just completely destroyed. And it destroyed $20,000 worth of product. We had to turn really quickly. We ended up sending a hot shot truck with brand new product to the restaurant in Florida overnight. I think we paid $1,800 to send this van with
Yeah,
a pallet of product to the customer. They were overwhelmed by everything that we did, which was great. But the engineer knew he just didn't read what the box needed to be on UPS. And I'm like, Connor, it is what it is, man. Let's move on. Not, I mean, made a mistake, yeah, but would I have caught that? Probably not. will I catch it next time? Hell yeah. We'll never
Yeah.
make that mistake again. But
Yeah.
he's like, "You're not mad?" And I'm like, "Well, I mean, yeah, it stings, but let's just, let's fix it. Let's move on. Let's, you know, go to battle with UPS, which we lost. I mean, of course. And, that was that was, discouraging in its own, right. I mean, we paid insurance and everything, and they're like, "Nope,
Yeah.
your insurance is null and void since the box didn't meet our rating."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "We have
All
a
that fine
truck
print.
parked on top of the box." Yeah. So but I mean, that guy, and he came to us as an intern, full-time engineer, and then
Mhm.
got an offer with Owens Corning that I couldn't even, remotely touch. And he came in and he had tears in his eyes and hands me his resignation letter. And like both of us are like teared up. And he's like, "Man, I really don't want to leave, but I can't turn this down." And I'm like, "Dude, I get it. Thank you for
Yeah.
allowing me to be part of your success." And I'm like, "Well, when you're tired of the corporate life, you know,
Yeah.
come back." And
Yeah.
so it was really cool. And we still go to lunch and, stay in contact and everything. But, those things are, invaluable to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are definitely. It's all about the relationships
Yeah.
and that trust and the relationships that
Yep.
you build. It's easier certainly to do in a whether you have a smaller company or a smaller team within a you know larger company. It's important to make those relationships, and you
Yeah.
know you've done well if they still want to go out and have lunch with you or coffee or something.
Yeah.
After they leave.
Yeah. Yeah. And the culture, I feel when you empower people and you are in front of a potential customer or an existing customer, and that energy level is a certain way, you're going to win more business
Yeah,
because everyone immediately likes everyone. They have trust for you, and it's just a sense of relief. And even through, we do so much of this now, video calls and things
yeah,
like that, and you
yeah,
can really get a feel for somebody through a video call. And I'm still old school. I still, like to fly and meet people and go to
yeah,
lunch or whatever.
yeah,
But this is, just like us right now. I mean, it would be better if we were in person and things
yeah.
like that. But you still get a good feel for, culture and things.
Yeah, yeah, it's one of those things. I actually have a client, so transitioning, from again just being an investor, seeing these companies hit the ceiling. I started kind of like an internal consultancy a couple of years ago, so that we could actively help the companies that we were investing in really avoid that ceiling. And I started doing workshops for
Okay.
leaderships and teams. And through these workshops, they were intended leveraging some of the same workshops and techniques and resources that um, you know top innovative companies have used for the last 10-15 years, called human-centered design.
Okay.
um, if Google's coming out with a new product, they use this process and these workshops to actually figure out where's the need, what's the problem, what do our customers actually want, what do they need to see, figuring out all of that. That's what this process does. I had been doing that for our portfolio companies and others in consulting for several years in the sense of product development. But a couple of years ago, we saw this ceiling, we saw that problem, and I said, hey, I think we can actually kind of repurpose this, actually kind of go in and help these companies solve the problems
Hmm.
that are causing them to hit that. So focus on the company, not the product itself,
Right.
because they're having so much success. The product is good, the customers are
Right.
happy with it, but you know your employees aren't happy. You're having all of these problems compound,
Hmm.
and let's start to solve them and start chipping away at these problems. And what we really noticed through that process of engaging with these teams, engaging with leadership teams, engaging with teams at all levels of organizations, and really digging in and saying, hey, let's solve this problem,
Right.
or even ask them for actually, the way we start is we get everyone's feedback on what are the biggest problems that you see that are really capping this company's potential. and so you ask a leader that, you ask the CEO and founder of the company that, you ask, you know, the lowest person, in the organization,
Right.
that same perspective. And these workshops get thousands of responses and data points anonymously out,
Wow.
and we're able to get all of this feedback and all of these thought patterns out of the individuals, and start to match those. Here's what leadership's seeing from the top, here's what everyone else is seeing in the middle, and other layers of the organization. And it's incredible, number one, oftentimes where the disconnect is,
Hmm.
um, but it also brings out those things about engagement. And that's really that process that helped me. I always knew culture was important.
Hmm.
You read the books, you listen to the gurus. Yeah, culture is important. Employee engagement's important. But I'm telling you, to what you just said a little bit ago, and that face-to-face thing, COVID changed everything.
Yeah. Oh,
And
absolutely.
it changed how people think. It changed
Hmm.
how people interact with other people. It changed their preferences on that and how they think they naturally want to communicate. And so these teams, whether they were remote or not, were defaulting into these different patterns that were, very much limiting their ability to, engage beyond what their day-to-day job is.
Right.
And so when we offered that opportunity to give feedback and say, hey, we need your feedback into what's ailing and what opportunities we have. We need everyone's feedback honestly, openly, anonymously, so you can say what you really think,
Hmm.
and get these out. And then, okay, well, it's clear these are the problems. Okay, now let's get some ideas out. And what are your ideas?
Right.
And sometimes when you do that and you head into a meeting, whether it's in person or over a Zoom or on a phone call, what happens is the loudest person in the room takes over and says, well, this is my idea, and this is what I
Yep.
think we should do, and this is what we're going to do. Meeting over, let's go.
Right.
And everyone else is sitting around the room like,
Right.
this person doesn't have a clue as to what
Right.
they're doing. I'm not doing that. That's
Sure.
not going to work. They didn't ask my opinion.
Yep.
And that just slowly starts, chipping away at that individual's confidence, at their
Hmm.
morale. Um, and you just start to slowly delve into this mode of, I don't want to collaborate. I don't feel trusted. I don't feel like I am valued, that my
Yeah.
opinion or my ideas are valued at this company. So I'm just going to default to this.
Yep.
And that default is probably 10 to 20% of the potential of that employee that you're paying a full salary for.
Yeah. Well, and it creates negative chatter. It creates some toxic, you know,
Yep.
environment. People are talking behind that individual's back,
Yep.
and I don't like what
Yep.
Susie wants us to do, and I
Yep.
think we should do this. And now they're, instead of working and trying to solve a problem together, they're standing around the drinking fountain, if you will, bitching,
Yeah.
and then productivity goes down, and all those fun things. So when you do these workshops, um, you're doing them before they're having issues, or have you done workshops with companies that you've identified that they've hit a ceiling, and what have how have you helped them get past that?
Yeah. Well, honestly, it's really both. And,
Okay.
over the last
Nice.
couple of years, that's where, what I've determined, because I didn't really think that way coming into it. We kind of designed it initially to be really for that company that, they've hit a ceiling. They realize there are challenges and issues, and they just don't know exactly what to do about it. And
Sure.
they just feel stuck. But we started really expanding that, and working with companies that, before they hit that, it's like, hey, whether we're investing with them or it's an outside company that's in, some oil and gas or something like that,
Right.
we can go in and say, hey, look, it's not that it's not working, but maybe there's a lot more that you could be doing. Maybe there's you can get more output from your people, more ideas from your people that will take you from this plateau that you've hit. Some business owners are okay with that plateau, just in the sense that, what, I'm making really good margins, I'm making good profits, I'm happy, I don't necessarily need more. But
Hmm.
maybe your teams need more. Maybe
Yeah.
the people that are working there, they want more fulfillment out of their job, and that status quo plateau that you tend to be in, you know you stay in that, and you have people that are hungry for more, not hungry for more work necessarily, but hungry
Right.
for more. Hey, I had this idea and I see it in motion, and
Yeah.
it's working, or it didn't work, and I learned from it, and now I can figure out another idea and move that forward. That brings so much more energy and fulfillment that you don't even necessarily have to do a lot more to get out of that plateau, and your team starts growing, and that starts pushing this
Yeah.
envelope up.
Yeah.
So that is what we've really seen, in that when you can, and we do it through workshops, but there's other ways, certainly, leaders of companies can do this. But you know what it boils down to is ultimately listening, and showing your employees that not only do you listen and you give them the opportunity, but you listen to not just their problems, you listen to their ideas, and you look at them, and
Right.
you honestly work through a process. And you don't have to take all their ideas, you don't have to, you can't do everything necessarily. But when they legitimately feel heard, that is the biggest differentiator. And honestly, it's a big side effect. When we
Oh
went into
yeah.
this to help these companies, that's not what I had in mind. I
Right.
had in mind that, hey, we're going to go through this process, and we're going to create a plan, and we're going
Hmm.
to we're going to get people on board with accountability to that plan, and we're going to
Yep.
define success, just like you traditionally do when you have a goal
Right.
and you're going out. And the process kind of landed there. But that unexpected positive side effect was that engagement, and that lifted everything else up, and they became more hungry, and had the tools and processes to now go and figure out other problems. And it's those little things then that start to compound, because wow, I
Yeah.
felt empowered. I was given permission to fail a little bit here, so I'm going to try other things that start making things a little bit better,
Yeah.
and things that are taking double the time, because we're making these little mistakes, and we have to go back and do this thing over again. That costs the company money, that costs you time and energy and frustration, that chip away down. What
Yep.
if these employees are empowered and feel like I am legitimately empowered and valued and heard to do
Yep.
this? It starts really adding that air pressure that pushes everything up, pushes up that plateau, and eventually you start. Sorry, my
Yeah.
hands are going the wrong way. But you,
Yeah.
you
You don't
you
want to go
start
down.
seeing that grow. Yeah. But yeah,
Yeah. No.
it's crazy.
Yeah. And I think the other part of that is the leader um, frees themselves up. Right. So if your team always brings you a problem and you're answering those problems, you're you're not doing what you're talking about. You're not building them up to coach them to figure the problem out. What you're doing is you're telling them every problem that you have, bring it to me, and I'm going to solve it.
Yep.
And you know, there may be people out there smart enough to solve every problem. Good for them. I'm not that person. But what it also does is it demoralizes them because now they feel every problem that they have to bring to somebody to figure it out. And instead of we just talked about this yesterday in Vistage, and I wish I would have taken a picture of it. Um, but it basically it was a card, and it had, what's your problem, and on the other side it's like, what's your solution to your problem, or something along those lines. But it was really challenging. If somebody brings me a problem, like, well, how do you think we should solve this? What's
Yes.
your, what do you think about this? What are your ideas? And if you don't have any, then come back when you do, and then we'll talk through those ideas. But
Yeah.
and I've had people say, well, what do you want me to do? I want you to come up with some solutions is what I, and they're like, the first couple times they're like, okay, but I don't know what to do. That's why I brought it to you. And I'm like, you'll figure it out, or we'll figure it out together, but
Yeah.
bring some ideas to the table. Don't just bring
Yeah.
the problem. And,
Yeah.
one of my buddies, he won't even talk to you. Like his folks bring him a problem. He's like, get out of here. Don't even come in my office if you don't have, some sort
Yeah.
of a solution to the
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
And, and they love the guy. I mean, they do.
Yeah.
They absolutely love him. And the first couple times they like, they'll go away and they, what the hell was that? Like I thought, I thought that this guy would just tell me what to do and I would move on.
Yeah.
And it really, yesterday I was thinking, as a kid, I would ask I'm a horrible speller. I mean, one of the worst. And I would always ask my dad, Dad, how do you spell this word? And he's like, look it up. It was, obviously before the internet. So you're flipping
Yeah.
through the
Yeah.
dictionary
Yeah. Yeah.
and, my, and I was just like, God, that guy's such a jerk. Why wouldn't he just tell me the answer? And
Mm.
then, now that I'm, 44, I'm reflecting back to when I was like 8 and I'm like, okay, he had a method. And it took
Yep.
me that long that long to realize it, even though it was something that small. And then you stop asking, maybe not for help, but hey, I got this idea. I want to run it by you. What do you think? Do you think it's a good idea or a bad idea? And at the end of the day, both people may not know if it's a good idea or a bad idea. You're like, okay, well, let's try it. It seems like a good idea, and we'll fail together if we fail, or we'll succeed together if we succeed. Um, but it definitely frees up, that leader to do more things. And
Yeah.
there's a great book out there that embarrassingly enough, I started. It's a wonderful book, and I put it on the shelf. I need to finish it. But I think it's called "Change Your Questions, Change Your Life,"
Mm.
and it's sitting upstairs. I wish I had it on my desk so I could show you, and I'll email you that after we get done with this. But I think it's
Yeah.
called "Change
Please.
Your Questions, Change Your Life," and it's a wonderful book, and it's a real life story, and it's about this leader that was just his home life was struggling, his work life was struggling. He just had hit a plateau. He couldn't, he didn't have trust of his folks. Um, his family life was, going to hell, and he hired a coach, and the coach started, you know, walking him through. Well, instead of you just always having an opinion about everything and telling people everything that you think, you know, ask some questions, get to the bottom of it with questions instead of you dictating everything.
Yeah.
And you're going to take your work week from an 80-hour work week probably down to a 40-hour work week.
Yeah.
And it is a really cool book, and definitely you can apply a lot of those things to leadership and just your home life.
Yeah. I love it. And that's the thing, asking questions. Like, so many times leaders and business owners, we feel like we have to have the answers.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
we have to be we have to be the smartest person in the room, even though oftentimes we say, well, I don't want to be the smartest person in the room. I want to hire smarter people than me. You say it, but then sometimes our actions, really tell a different story in the sense that,
Yeah.
and I think this goes to kind of this 80s, 90s business culture that a lot of
Yep.
us kind of came up in, and that you have to be the strong one, and and not show that's what I grew up in. I grew up
Yep.
in a small farm town, and a lot of blue collar, and like you got to be a manly man, and
Yep.
this is what a man looks like. And so many misnomers, I think, that that we have to, as a society, kind of get past, in the sense that yeah, you can be a man and still admit that I don't have all the answers. I don't know. I
Yeah.
can ask, back before Google Maps, it's like there's always that joke, the man would get lost and refuse to admit that they were lost, and stop
Yeah.
at the gas station and get directions. It's
Yep.
really that same thing oftentimes
Yeah.
in business, that we refuse to either admit that we're lost, or admit that we're wrong. And it
Yeah.
becomes so much easier, and there's so much trust that's built up with the people around you
Sure.
when you do the opposite. And
Yeah.
outcomes are so much better for
Yeah.
everyone when we as humans can, just psychologically get past ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and it humanizes yourself. And
Yes.
I think that, Emily, we did a podcast last week. And she's marketing wizard. I think her company's called Marketing Metal. She's kind of got like a metal theme behind it.
Yep.
And
Yep.
she's our age, and she's like, my biggest thing with marketing is just humanizing the company
Mm,
and putting a personality with the company, because
yep.
people want to deal with people. They don't want to deal with a website. And I'm like,
Yep.
man, that's a really powerful marketing idea. But even, with leadership, you want to be personalized. There's a guy that I worked for one time. He's like, a leader can never have a bad day. And I'm like, what? Like, you're going to be perfect every day. Like, you're going to come in here perfect. You're never like, your mood's never going to be off. You're always going to be happy. You're never going to be anxious. I'm like, who the hell are you kidding? And that
Yeah.
was long, long time ago. And I think that when somebody of a authority figure can humanize themselves and tell a story about how failure, or show failure, or admit failure, it does build trust. One of the
Absolutely.
and I and there's a lot of ego that goes into that, and people, especially guys, don't want to ask directions. And I was just thinking of a story. There's a couple weeks ago, I was driving up to the lake, and it was raining, it was nasty, it was cold. I had my dog with me. I pulled into to the fuel station to get diesel, and I jump out of my truck and I lock my truck, and immediately I'm like, I don't remember the code to get back in my truck. And my truck's
Yeah.
running, my
Yep.
dog's inside, my phone's inside with my code, and I
Yep.
just,
Of course.
hadn't used my code forever. And I fill up my truck and I hang it up, and I'm like, all right. So now I have to go into the gas station attendant and admit that I locked my truck, locked my keys in my truck while it's running, and my dog's inside. I mean, it's like country song.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, the sheriff around, and I'm out in the middle of the boonies, and they're like, well, the sheriff's really awesome. Call the sheriff and they'll come and they'll get you in your truck. And I'm like, I am not calling the sheriff to get in my truck. And it was like an hour went by of me trying to get in my truck, and I'm not a good thief. And finally, I walk in, and this is after calling my son, trying to get my code, and my girlfriend trying to get my code, and all this stuff. At least an hour goes by, and I walk in, and I'm like, "What's the sheriff's number?" And she just start she just starts laughing, and so she calls the sheriff for me, and I talk to him like, "Yeah, I'll be there in 15 minutes or whatever." And it's a younger guy, he's from Toledo, and he gets out and he's like, "Could you have picked a shittier evening to lock your keys in your truck?" I'm like, "Hey man, I I get it." So and I go back and I tell Ashley and the team this, and they're like, "You're an idiot." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know." But everyone
Yep.
had a good laugh at my expense. So,
Yep. No, that's good. That's good.
yeah. Yeah. But let's go back. I want to touch on your post here real quick before we end. We're kind of getting to that time, and I know that you're busy today. You have kids to pick up and all that fun stuff. But
Yeah.
did we
Yeah.
touch on everything? Because your post on LinkedIn was awesome, and I just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure that we touched on everything. I mean, we've kind of brought up multiple great points. But yeah, I are we
Well,
missing
well,
anything? I think we
I think
covered it.
the summary of that post
Yeah.
is that, in my judgment, as I've seen a lot of different things, all sorts of different industries, different companies I've worked with, small companies that are just getting started that are going through high growth, large middle market companies. I've seen a lot, not only through my
Mhm.
career but over the last couple of years, and we're in this different world now, and I truly believe, and this is what I said in the post, I truly believe that employee engagement and culture are going to be the biggest factors of business success and organizational success, um, in the coming decade or decades, more so
Can't agree
than
more.
anything else. You can hire the most talented people in the world that have incredible resumes, but if you don't if you don't create a culture and realize that culture every day of collaboration and engagement with employees and empowering them to solve problems within your
Yep.
company and create that additional margin. If you're not doing that, if you're not able to do that, then that is going to be a massive competitive disadvantage.
Yep.
So it's always been one of those things where, like we talked about earlier, you read the books, you hear the podcasts, you hear the gurus saying culture, 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 and it's
Yep.
like, yeah, well, I've got the ping pong table. We have casual Fridays. We have a happy hour. Every couple of weeks, we send out the surveys and you know that is not enough in this
Right.
post-pandemic world of different mindsets, different it's a different world, with
Sure.
technology, everything that's changing. If you have happy, engaged employees that feel empowered to help solve those problems, you're either going to compound up or you're going to compound down. If you
Yep.
compound down, that's your competitive disadvantage. And I don't care how good your product is. I don't care how well your customers like you today. Eventually, that is going to change, and it'll probably happen sooner than you think.
Yeah. And I can't agree with that more. And there's so many examples of companies that don't have a good culture that had a great product. I mean, uh, what's the hostess company that just went down? Maybe it was, I think before COVID, but I mean, who the hell doesn't like a little Debbie? And the
Yeah,
company
yeah, yeah. Oh,
bankrupts.
yeah. I remember that. Yeah, yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
it wasn't Little Debbie a
Well,
hostess
I knew
company and
there was a Twinkie craze there for a while. People were
Twinkie.
going
That's
crazy
yep.
trying to get their hands on Twinkies because you
That's what
thought
it
you'd
was.
never be able to again. But
Yeah.
then someone ended up buying them, and
Yep.
they still make them. But there was a
Yeah.
big scare there for a while.
Yeah. And if you really dug into that, it was
Yeah,
probably very, very culture driven.
yeah.
And yeah, I love the subject. I could probably talk about it for another 2 hours. Um,
Yeah, but
but
that's a 100 year.
yeah.
Yeah, but it's a hundred
Yeah.
year plus company. Probably Twinkies have been around forever,
Yep.
and I'm sure maybe their sales went down a little bit because we're a little bit more health conscious overall as a society. But still,
Right.
it's a staple. You'd never imagine that a company like that is going to go
Right.
under.
Yep.
And they're like you said, they hit that problem, and eventually your employees just give up, and your
Yep.
margins start slipping, everything starts
Yeah.
slipping because they start making more mistakes. Those mistakes compound, it slows things down, things cost more, your
Yep.
customers are unhappy because the packaging is bad and it looks bad sitting on the shelf, and it doesn't taste quite right, so people stop
Yep.
buying it.
Yep.
100-year
Just
company gone,
compounds.
like
Yep.
legacy gone,
Oof.
or
Yeah.
all of that value gets bought up by some private equity company or another company for a penny on the dollar, and
Right. Yep.
if they're better at that, then they're going to take your assets and make it theirs.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Ryan, tell everyone how they can get in touch with you. Email, website, LinkedIn, Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not your yeah.
Find me on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Ryan Retcher on LinkedIn. That's the best way to connect and engage with me. But my email is Ryan at loudx.vc. So that's LOUDX.VC, Victor Charlie.
Perfect. And we'll post it. Like you and I were talking before, this gets turned into a blog post, so you can actually
Yeah,
read everything if you want. We'll do some posts on LinkedIn and all that fun stuff too. So, man, I
awesome.
really appreciate you coming. It's good
Thanks for having me.
conversation's easy, right? Yeah,
Anytime,
absolutely.
anytime.
Perfect. Thanks again,
All right.
man.
Thanks, Dustin. Take care.
Yep. Thanks everyone for joining us for this episode of MFG Monkey. If you have any questions or suggestions for future episodes, please email them to us at info@mfgmonkey.com.